Hello, Frozen.
Ah! What are you doing on my computer?
Well, I have to talk to you, of course. You know better than I do that what I mentioned before certainly wouldn't be the last time I would mention it. Season 2 of this series has only just begun.
Season 2. Don't you see I'm typing a review right now?
A review that you don't have an intro skit or joke for and are using this lore expansion in its place, yes.
Fine. What do I need to do?
First, take this PDA. That PDA allows me to be able to contact you in any dimension. It'll also be an upgrade compared to that remote you've been using. You can keep an address book of dimensions you've been to instead of writing them down on that sheet of paper in your drawer.
I need you to stop watching me.
There's a lot of things that I'd like to have as well, but we can't all be lucky winners. Anyways, the first address in the PDA is the dimension I want you to check out.
Let's get this over with. Well, there's nothing here. Can I go now?
Now hold on, there is stuff here. You have to imagine that a place is here though.
What?
Trust me, just imagine that something is there. Believe with all of your heart that it exists.
That sounds really stupid.
Oh come on, imagination is one of the most important elements for a person to have to express themselves and grow. If you lack imagination, are you even human at that point?
Okay, no deep stuff this video, please.
Look, your imagination can't be dead, so try imagining that something's there, please.
Just imagine something is there. Just believe. It actually worked.
Told ya. Do you see why I want you to investigate here now? Wow, your imagination really is dead. Someone could have imagined whatever the threat was, made it real, and now is going through the other dimensions and wiping them out.
So, what am I supposed to look for?
Less look for things, more ask around. See if the people inside have seen anything weird.
In a world where you can imagine anything, what exactly is supposed to be weird?
That's for them to answer and you to find out. Now, get to asking.
Fine.
Oh, almost forgot. Don't tell any of them you're from another dimension. In fact, that goes for basically any of the dimensions you visit now. Most dimensions aren't even supposed to know that there are other ones out there unless they discover it on their own. We need to protect the dimensional border that lies between them.
Sure, whatever. I'll let you know of anything once I'm out. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, a show about a boy who has to visit his imaginary friend in a foster home for imaginary friends every single day in order to prevent said imaginary friend from getting adopted. The amount of times I say imagine is gonna kill me, by the way. This show was very creative, working off of the imagination of children and how kids grew out of their imaginary friends and expanded on that with a foster home made specifically for them. And the game with the same exact title is based off of this cartoon. I'm assuming that most of you watching this video didn't even know that Foster's had a video game until now, well, aside from those on the Cartoon Network website. It actually has 2 video games, the one I'll go over in this video for Game Boy Advance and another one on the DS. This game is more of a lost relic compared to most of the other games that I've done on the channel, so today I'll be going over the Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends video game to find out why it became such a lost title. The levels in this game are based off of popular episodes from seasons 1 through 3. I actually remember every single episode that was involved in this game, and I haven't watched the show in years, so the selection choice was incredibly good. Now, whether you liked some episodes that are in this game or not, are a different story that I'm not gonna get into. The order you play through the episodes aren't in order with how they aired, and that's not exactly the most annoying thing. In fact, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It's just a little weird when you find that out. What does bother me is that some levels either don't tell the story correctly or don't show the full outcome of the episode played out. They kinda just leave it off at a certain point and move on to the next episode. I mean, if you're gonna use an episode, show everything about the episode's plot, since glazing over some details and rushing the ending just straight up rushes the level itself. And there are ending cutscenes after beating some levels of the game, but if this was done for every level in the game, then it would work out better to properly end the levels that don't have them. That's really the only complaint I have about the stories used. Before every level, you get a cutscene that explains what happens in that episode and what you're supposed to do for said level. And as I mentioned before, some levels afterwards also have a cutscene. They look pretty good, aside from a few inconsistencies that you wouldn't really notice unless you paid a lot of attention to them, but it's not the worst thing in the world. The in-game characters, however, either look spot on like Eduardo, Wilt, and Coco, or just a tiny bit weird like Mac and Frankie. Their eyes just look off. Ironically, it's only the human characters in this game that look weird. Anyways, the areas of Foster's are also nice to look at. The unique art style of the show is shown off greatly in this game, and there is actually a good amount of detail in some objects like the bedding. There is no voice acting for this game, but there is a good amount of text given, and some of it seems like it was straight from the show, which makes sense given how every level is an episode from the show. Dialogue also feels like it's close to the actual representation of how characters act, so that's good too. But to be fair, an argument can be made that there is quite a lot of text that is in this game, and having to sit down and read through some of that is a bit annoying depending on the person you are, but for me, I didn't mind it that much. The music, however, isn't to the same quality as everything else. It does sound like it would come from the show, however the tracks aren't long, and some of them are different versions of the main theme which the show itself has done. But for a video game, especially the kind that this one is, which I'll get to in a second, and the fact that these short songs loop, it doesn't work well in this game's favor. Playing as Mac and Bloo, you travel throughout the foster home while searching for objects to complete objectives for levels. To get around areas, you have to make jumps over gaps and slide along rails. When you enter a room with an object that you need to collect, an icon will appear at the top. There will be some enemies that you encounter which you can throw paper balls at to stun them. Mac and Bloo both have a unique ability. Bloo can turn into a ball to roll under small spaces. Mac is able to double jump for some reason. It would actually make sense for Bloo to be able to, but then there would be no reason to play as Mac. If you get hurt, you can get health by collecting candy, even though Mac shouldn't eat sugar at all in the first place, or else he becomes a complete lunatic and... let's just assume the candy's sugar-free. You can talk to the residents of the building and they'll either give you tips, usually, or they can help you out by moving you to a certain spot or moving objects around. Throughout the whole house, there are tickets that you can collect for 3 minigames in the Game Hive. Whack-a-bee after getting 50 tickets, Skee Ball after 75, and Paddle Ball after 100. There are a lot of characters that are in this game, including the usual like Wilt, Eduardo, Coco, Frankie, Mr. Harriman, and Madam Foster, but there's also the occasional Terrence and Duchess appearance, and even more occasionally, Bendy. You know Bendy, one of the most disliked characters of the whole show. The character that literally only appears in the episode he debuted in, and never again. The episode that fans were so upset with that the negative reception made Lauren Foss, the head writer at the time, apologize to them. That Bendy. We all know him, and we all wish we didn't. This game controls surprisingly well. The momentum for going along rails felt great, and controlling jumps was fine, which would make this game a great platformer. I wish there was more of it. There was a strange glitch that it kept coming up on though, where I moved really fast when I was walking, and there were multiple ways of activating this. Now, while that may seem like a bad thing, going extremely fast was the only thing that was fun for me while playing. This game is nothing but fetch quests. Almost every single episode aside from boss fights is a fetch quest, so it feels like you're doing the same thing over and over again. This also means that the developers use episodes just for fetch quest purposes, which means the creativity put towards the levels is extremely lacking. It doesn't help that this game's directions and hints are sometimes stupidly vague. I guess it makes a little bit of sense for a fetch quest game, but there are a lot of reasons that add up for why it does not work in this game at all. The major reason is that a lot of stuff doesn't translate well from the show to this game. For starters, the foster home manages to be too small and too big at the same time. It's too small to be fully representative of the house in the show because Foster's and the amount of rooms within it is enormous. However, you don't go to that many areas of the game, and at around 1/3 through it, you go through reused areas for almost all of the rest of the game. This then makes things boring since you're doing constant fetch quests in the same areas. However, a part of me is grateful that the house in this game isn't as large as it is in the show, because there are too many doors that are inconsistent as it is. Too often are there a bunch of doors that are in one of 3 conditions: locked, opened, or opens up later in a level, and there's little indication for which any of these doors are before exploring. It also adds to the confusion when some rooms that are available in previous levels aren't available in future levels. Some rooms that weren't available in previous levels are available later in future levels. Some are always open but have a bunch of tickets in them, which you might think are just for tickets for the minigames, which aren't even good by the way. But for certain levels, important stuff is inside them, and some are always closed, aside from a special event. But you'll never know what rooms you can access or have important stuff in them until you try to enter them. This means you'll have to check every single door you run across to find out if you even can open the door, then find out if it has anything inside, and either leave it if there is no item, or get the item if there is one. There also isn't a map, so you have to memorize where every room is and where it goes. Otherwise, you'll be stuck roaming the entire building checking doors until you manage to find your way. Sometimes you have to collect a stupidly high amount of objects as well, meaning that if your search goes south at any point in time, you're gonna have a really hard time finding out where you haven't already searched without looking through every single door again. Some jokes that are from the show also don't work well in this game at all. I want to make something very clear. Jokes for a TV show don't always have the same result if that same joke is used in a video game. One example is that Duchess tells you to go through a door after a horrible stealth segment, and going through the door that she tells you to go through makes you redo everything you've already done in that level. All the progress you've made now means nothing. As a TV joke, this works because you aren't expecting this and it's someone else having to deal with it. As a joke for a game, it fails because the player themselves has to redo everything they have done. And as I already mentioned, the stealth segment is horrible, and I'll explain why in a bit. The other example is when you need to get a piece of Madame Foster's statue that was broken because of Bloo. However, you're going through rooms keeping in mind of the indicator that appears whenever there is one in the room. By talking to Coco, she reveals that she was hiding a piece in one of her eggs, which isn't even really how the episode itself played out. But the indicator that is supposed to have the piece show up doesn't have it show up, and no other level in the game does this, so you have no reason to assume this. So now I can't even trust the indicator that is supposed to appear on rooms I've already checked. Meaning, again, I have to now go through the rooms and make sure I search everything. This requires not only knowledge of the show, but knowledge of specific episodes which not everyone who plays this will have. The bosses are all terrible. How you're supposed to do most of them you wouldn't think about unless you did it on accident, and even when you do it right, you're guaranteed to get hit due to the design of the hazards you're supposed to use to stun Terrence and how perfect you have to be to avoid them otherwise. Also, thanks developers for giving Terrence the ability to snipe you from off screen. That helps very much for these boss fights. And if you think it's just the boss fights and the fetch quest stuff that has issues, nope, the platforming has issues as well. This game has the issue of leaps of faith, which I mentioned in my review for Ice Age. Though this game is not nearly as bad with it, it still had enough of an effect to be noteworthy. There are 2 segments in this game where you have to make your way down a broken stairwell by sliding on the rails. The problem is not the rails themselves, but the ground right underneath them. Landing on the ground underneath these rails causes you to have to restart that segment, which makes no sense since no other part of the game is like this, and it doesn't even give an actual reason as to why. And if you can't see what's below you, you could easily fall onto the steps and have to start over. Oh, also, you're on a time limit for these 2, so not only do you have to be careful, you also have to rush. Objects can be thrown down at you by Bendy from off screen, and there's no sound indication of when he throws them, so you'll never know when it's coming at you. And by the time you notice these, it's probably too late for you before you end up getting hit. And I thought I couldn't hate you anymore, Bendy. And that stealth segment that I mentioned earlier has a similar issue, because you might slide on a rail into a person that you couldn't see beforehand, and by doing this, you have to redo everything in that segment. This segment was one of the biggest pains to get through, and then I had to go through that stairwell segment where you have to restart if you landed on the steps. Keep in mind, all of that was only the second level of the game, so after that point, my expectations dropped drastically, and I still managed to get disappointed more and more as I went through the game. Everything, on top of the music being ridiculously repetitive to the point where it felt like it repeated every 30 seconds for levels that ended up being 30 minutes, drove me insane during my playthrough and constantly gave me headaches every time I played it.
This place is crazy, it's crazy, I'm so hungry, I'm crazy, I'm crazy, do da do da da do.
You're not able to switch between Mac and Bloo whenever you want. Instead, when going into certain rooms, you'll become the character that is useful for it, but a lot of the times when going through rooms, you'll just randomly switch between the two. As in, you have a chance of switching between them. The only time you can switch between Mac and Bloo is the final boss of the game, which makes me wonder why they didn't allow you to switch between them earlier, as they both travel together all the time, or at least that's what the text implies, and it would help give a sense that they were actually both there together. However, it's not 100% needed, since you can still get through the game, and the only bonus content is revolving around the tickets anyways, but it's just weird that you can't switch between them all the time. It's rather hard to tell what you can and can't platform on, as some things just don't make any sense, and other objects look too similar to the background, making it hard to see if you can actually jump on it or not. So traversing through some areas is a little bit of annoyance. This doesn't happen too often though, so you'll be able to get through most of the game's platforming. Besides, you'll probably be more distracted with everything else that I already mentioned before. This game should have been a platformer. Mac and Bloo control really well, and I'm sure that if it was a platformer first, then everything would have worked out better. But there were so many problems that were piled on top of each other due to trying to represent the show accurately as a video game, while failing to follow the rules set within the game itself, and undermining the amount of creativity and diversity of content that should have been put towards this. And again, Mac and Bloo control really well, so the potential is there. But since the entire game is repetitive, inconsistent, and rage-inducing, which is the last thing I expect for a game about a foster home for imaginary friends, it ends up failing in almost every way. It fails as a game for foster's home for imaginary friends, and it horribly fails as a game, period. And I can imagine that not that many people took this game very well, and that's probably why it's such a lost game today. Well, I found nothing. I asked Frankie, Mr. Harriman, Wilt, Eduardo, Coco, and even Madame Foster, and nobody saw anything weird. It doesn't help that Coco needed to be translated, Frankie kept getting interrupted by Mr. Harriman, and Madame Foster is kinda wacko.
Well, what about Duchess?
I'm not dumb enough to bother with her.
Smart kid. Well, it's not like we're gonna find the thing immediately, but since there's no luck here, we'll have to try somewhere else.
Yeah, of course. What's going on, my fellow residents? It's me, TheFrozenCavern, and thank you guys for making it to the end of this video. Now, as I kinda mentioned at the very beginning, Season 2 has only just begun, and in case you guys don't really know what I'm referencing at all, make sure you watch my Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension game review, because that explains a lot of stuff that I mentioned in both the intro and outro portions of this video, and it will also help explain things that I do for future videos. So again, make sure you watch that video as well. And also, I don't want Season 2 to end immediately. I want Season 2 to go on at least for a little bit, mainly because, one, it literally just started, and two, I want to see how far I can take this lore stuff before you guys get tired of me. And essentially what I'm going to be doing for a good amount of the videos is that for games that I select, I have to find some kind of reason as to why I'm going to this world. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, maybe that thing appeared because someone imagined it and it went to other dimensions, and similar stuff like that. So again, hopefully all this lore stuff is interesting and fun for you guys, because to be honest, it's very, very fun for me. But regardless of whether you care about that or not, make sure you guys go into the description, because that's where all of my social medias are. My Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Discord are all in the description, and there are all ways of you guys making sure of whenever I upload another video, or have an update for the channel, or a good amount of other stuff in general. But until the next video, take care.
I want you for a